Welcome to AI for Good, the leading, action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies, in partnership with 50+ UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI for Good series, which is jointly organized by the International Labour Organization and the International Telecommunication Union. My name is Pavel Gmedek, and I'm a senior researcher at the ILO's research department, where I work mostly on AI and work and on trying to understand how AI is affecting occupations and the world of work more broadly. This is a thematic series which I co-chair with Janine Berg, my colleague. And the idea is simple. We invite here interesting guests to discuss different aspects of AI and work. Recordings of previous sessions are available on IO Live channel and also on AI for Good pages. And we will paste a link so that you can catch up on previous sessions. Let me set the context for today's discussion a little bit. From the research that we have published at the ILO, we know that women are more exposed to potential effects of the latest wave of AI, generative AI especially. And that is particularly the case in countries with high incomes, where we estimate that some 41% of female employment is exposed to interactions with this technology, compared to only 28% of male employment. When we look at the jobs at the risk of automation, the share of female employment is estimated at some 9.6% versus 3.5% for men-held jobs, basically almost 3 times larger. And these differences in exposure have a lot to do with occupations in which men and women typically work, and the fact that the effect of these technologies on occupations are not even. So today's session has a goal of unpacking a little bit the why behind these effects. The session is about AI, STEM jobs, and gender gaps, but also about AI and gender more broadly. To clarify, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And in the first part of the discussion, we will talk about how AI adoption is reshaping demand for STEM education and why this growth is not benefiting women equally. And in the second part, we will explore occupational segregation between men and women more broadly. And for that, I am joined today by 2 fantastic guests. The first speaker is Dr. Alexis Antoniadis. He is a professor, director, and chair of international economics at Georgetown University, Qatar. He is a Fulbright scholar, has a PhD, Master of Philosophy, Master in Economics from Columbia University, and a dual BA in Mathematics and Economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In his earlier career, Dr. Antoniadis served as an assistant economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And at Georgetown, he has led major projects, including the first micro-study of Gulf economies and an analysis of social media sentiment in the Arab world. He is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on the economies of the Gulf countries. And the second speaker is Dr. Hannah Liebman. She's a labor economist in the ILO's research department. Hannah is also my colleague and one of these people who always impress me with the depth and breadth of the technical knowledge. She's an expert in skills, dynamics, and policy evaluation, with recent research on occupational segregation and the valuation of women's work. She's also one of the lead authors of ILO's forthcoming flagship report on lifelong learning and skills dynamics, which will be launched in May 2026. And I'm pretty sure she will also touch upon that during the discussions. So with this introduction, let me just say a little bit about the session structure before I hand over to Alexis. In terms of the format, we will start by the presentation by Alexis. We will have then comments from Hannah, and we will close with a moderated Q&A. And I encourage you to post your questions on the live video wall so that we can try to pick them up, and I will try to ask them to our guests today. And with that, let me hand over to Alexis for the first presentation.
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Excited to join you and your colleague, Hannah, and to the audience who join us today. So let me start sharing my slides and tell you what I will talk about today. As Pavel said, we have a paper with a series of colleagues, and what we do, we look at how the rise in the demand for AI jobs is driving up the demand for STEM education. And this is part of a broader agenda I have on studying how AI affects labor markets. To put this in context, on the left side, you see a graph that captures the gender wage gap over time since the 1980s. So a number of 37.7% basically mean that on average, after we control for a few things, men earn more than women. And what you see is that the gender wage gap has come down significantly in the 80s, but then it stayed constant for the last 3 decades. There are many reasons for that. Maybe women don't value salary as much, they value benefits, but there are many reasons. But there was a great progress in reducing the gender wage gap achieved, let's say, over the last 4 decades. Now, the other thing I want you to take with you before I start is that when we try to understand what drives the gender wage gap or the inequality in wages, is not really differences in education. So even on the right table now, what you see is that for different levels of education, so every column is different level of education, men, blue column, earns more than women, the orange. So education doesn't seem to be the story why men on average earn more. And it doesn't seem to be the story for many different types of inequalities, such as race, age, and other parameters. What seems to be driving inequality is occupational choice. So I want us to remember that before I start. So your decision to choose into an occupation may affect the earnings you get in your life, because with skill bias technical change, with progress in technology, the demand for some occupations grew faster than others, and wages in those occupations grew faster than others. So if Hannah put herself in an occupation that grew a lot, her wage would go up. And if I had chosen an occupation that was not in very high demand, then wages wouldn't go up. And that was driving inequality. Now, why do I bring this up? Because we know that AI is creating many job opportunities, and these are expected, I mean, based on our data, I'll show you actual data. In 2014, we saw that less than 1% of all jobs posted in the US required some AI-related skill. And I'll come back to you and explain our data and how we can find that. By 2022, that share rose to 2.2%. So 1 out of 50 jobs posted in the US required some AI-related skill. And of course, in some occupations, some industries, the share was higher than others. Now, why is this important? Because we know that STEM workers, those in science, technology, engineering, and math, on average, earn 26% more than non-STEM occupation. If we only look at women, women in STEM earn 35% more. But then when you look at what percentage of the workers in STEM are female, that's only 24%. Even though there is a wage premium for women to work in STEM, what we have now is an underrepresentation of women in STEM. So why did we want to do this paper, and what we want to do is the following. We want to understand the impact of AI on the STEM gender gap. As more and more jobs require AI skills, does that push more people into STEM degrees? And what about the gender gap? Why is that important? Because if it's pulling relatively more women into STEM degrees than men, then the STEM gender gap will close. So more and more women will be getting these high-paying jobs, and the gender wage gap, the first picture I showed you, will decrease further. And that will be a positive outcome. However, if AI is pulling more students into STEM degrees, which would be great, but it's pulling more men than women, then the STEM gender gap, in relative terms, more male students pursue STEM, that will increase. So more male students will be getting these high-paying jobs than women. And what will happen is the gender wage gap may actually start to rise again. And the progress that we have seen in the very first slide will be reversed. Okay, so to summarize, we have two research questions. First one, does the rise in AI lead to higher demand for STEM education? And if it does it drive up demand for both men and women equally or disproportionately? Okay. So how does AI affect the gender gap in STEM? That's our main question. It's very simple, but I hope I can motivate it why it's an important question to ask. Now, how are we going to do this? On the one hand, we need to have data on the degrees acquired by students. We use US data, and it captures about 5,000 institutions in the US, which I will show you next. And we have for every student the type of degree they received, the major, and then we can say if it's STEM and not STEM. We have the location of the institution, and we have characteristics about the student, gender, age, race, and so on. We also need data on the demand for AI. So what we will do there, and this is very common in this type of work, we exploit data from job vacancies posted online job vacancies, or OJVs. So every company, every institution, when they advertise a position, they put the information online, and that information is public information. Lightcast is a company in the US that has been collecting this information daily. They claim from 40 to 50,000 portals, and we have the data from them. So this data, as I will show you, will allow us to pick any geographical area, say a US county, and for a given period, say a year, we will be able to find out what percentage of the jobs posted mention an AI skill. So in a sense, the exercise will be simple. I will be able to examine a county that is posting a lot of jobs that require AI skills versus one that is not, and see whether in the one that you have more AI jobs posted, whether there's more demand for STEM. Of course, you need to control for econometric issues, and we'll get to that. So we have data on degrees, we have data on AI in demand, and then we have some demographics for controls, such as income population, offshoring, outsourcing, immigration, like different factors that can drive the demand for STEM that is not because of AI. Okay, but these are the data, just to give you a sense of the degrees. Each year we have 5,348 institutions. We want the institutions to be present during the entire period, which is from 2013 to 2021. We have between 3.2 to 3.7 million degrees awarded. And again, you can think of every degree as one row in our dataset. Now, the interesting thing is that in 2013, from all those 3 million degrees awarded in the US, only 16% were in STEM degrees. By 2021, we see that 22% of all the degrees awarded were in STEM degrees. So you see that there is an increase in the demand for STEM education. Now, looking at the gender angle, throughout this period, about 6 out of 10 students who receive a university degree in the US are female. And that has stayed relatively constant. All right, so we see that demand for STEM is going up, but it's not because of AI. What we want to do is disentangle the impact of AI in driving the demand for STEM versus something else. Now, this figure is the gender gap in STEM. Of course, we see that it's going up, but let me explain first how we define this. We take the share of male students that pursue STEM, so S, over the total number of male students, and we subtract from that the share of female students that pursue STEM versus all the female students that earn a degree. So if 10% of all male students go for STEM degrees and 10% of all female students go for STEM degrees, then the gap is zero. However, if 10% of all male students go for STEM degrees, but only 8% of female students go for STEM, then the gap is 2%. All right, so a positive gap shows that there is a gender gap in STEM. Now, what you see with the blue line is from 2013 to the end of 2021, which is the period of our study. And it's constrained, by the way, because of data. So during that period, we have that we see clearly that the gender gap in STEM education has been rising in the US. Okay, and this is not a welcoming outcome. But we want to understand if does AI play a role? Maybe AI can reverse that, or maybe without AI, the increase in the gender gap in STEM would have been bigger. So we need to study how AI affects the STEM education. Talking about STEM education, well, of course, we have STEM in computer, in math, in engineering at the very bottom, but we have in psychology, in health professions, in agriculture. And what you see that if you take psychology, for every 10 female students in psychology, there are 3 male students. But if you go to engineering or transportation, in transportation and materials moving, for every 10 female students, there are 78 male students. Okay, so there's a big variation in the share of male to female students, even within STEM degrees. Of course, when you look at engineering and math, there are so many degrees, all of them qualify as STEM. When you look at psychology, not every psychology degree will qualify as STEM. We'll come back to this because it will play a very big role later on. But anyway, we want to study some parameter of interest. That will be our Y, and I don't want to bore you with econometrics. We will have a lot of controls. Maybe immigration affects the decision, maybe offshoring, maybe outsourcing, maybe unemployment rate in that county. We have a lot of controls, but you also have a measure of the AI intensity in that county. So what we want to understand is how the intensity of AI, which we will measure from job hirings, affects the parameter of interest. So for us, all I want you to take from here is this beta to this coefficient. If it's positive, then AI will have a positive impact on parameter Y. And if it's negative, AI has a negative impact. I'll come back to what Y is, how we build the AI. And maybe I should say, as Pavel said, please share your questions in real time, and we'll get to that. All right, so how do we measure AI? What do we do? We scan those job posts, and if we come across any of those keywords below, we flag it as being a job post that requires some AI-related skill. So we do a very simple exercise counting, and then we say in this county, at this period, what percentage of the jobs required AI? 1%. And then over time, if it changed and it went to 2%, we say the intensity went from 1 to 2. And then has the change in intensity increased uptake in STEM? Now, very quickly, I can show you that in management in 2014, only 0.4% of all jobs required an AI-related skill, and it went up to 1.9% in 2022 in the first quarter. In computer and math, from 3.3%, it went to 15.8%. In military, from 0.3 all the way at the end, it went to 1.7. All right, so now we can measure these things at the occupational level. And we have a lot of other papers that try to understand those implications. I'll skip endogeneity, but we do need to, one concern we have is the following. If I know that in one county, there is a lot of demand for STEM education, I may go and take and open up a business there that needs to hire a lot of AI talented people because I know a lot of people will be studying STEM. So there's an endogeneity issue. It's not that because of the AI posting, many people pursue STEM, but it's because there are many people pursuing STEM that we open up the business there, and that create more jobs with AI. So we control for that. We use what's called a shift share instrument. I will not go into that. The column one will be without the share. But let me just show you the results, and we can move very fast now. If I look at all the degrees awarded in the US in my data set, and I look at what impact the AI intensity had on degrees, we find a positive coefficient, 17.17. What this means is that in counties that have a higher share of AI jobs posted, there are more people pursuing STEM. So it's driving up the demand for STEM education by all students. And of course, we control for many things like state year fixed effects. We have instrumental variable approach. We control for immigration, offshoring, income levels, unemployment, and a bunch of other things. All right. Now, what this says, again, is that AI is driving up the demand for STEM education. Because our institutions are of three different types, associate, bachelor's, and master's, we can replicate the exercise by the type of institution. And what we find for associate degrees, these are technical 2-year community colleges, it doesn't have a statistically significant impact. However, for bachelor's and for master's, the impact is economically more significant and statistically significant. And that's what we would expect. If AI has an impact on STEM, it would show up on bachelor's degree and master's degree. We also have data on the person who gets a degree, and we have data on the arrays. So what we see is a positive coefficient for all races, for Asian, Black, Hispanic, White, and others. And that's welcoming. Of course, the impact is higher for Asian and for White. But what we find is not only does AI raise the demand for STEM education, it does so across the board when it comes to race. So that's the first finding. That answers our first question. But then what about the gender gap? So what we do next is straightforward. We want to split the impact on men and women. And unfortunately, our results are not great. Statistically, they are great, but for society, they are not. Let me explain why. The first column is without the instrumental variable, so let's look at the second column. Across all degree, AI is rising the STEM gender gap. So this share, the share of male STEM students over total minus the share of female STEM students over total, when you have more AI, that gap is increasing. It's decreasing for all degrees. It's decreasing for associate degrees, for bachelor's, for master's degree. It's increasing, the gender gap in STEM is increasing among Asian students, Black students, Hispanic, White, and other. So unfortunately, we find that AI is driving more students into STEM and across race. That is great, but it's also increasing the gender gap in STEM. And this is a major concern. So let me summarize. AI is exacerbating the gender gap in STEM. And why is it doing that, by the way? The reason why it's doing that is the following. I can go back to this table. At the very top, we have STEM degrees that are very popular by female students. At the bottom, we have STEM degrees that are very popular by male students. So what we find is AI is driving more kids into STEM degrees, but it's pulling them more into computer science and engineering that are male dominated, rather than psychology and health sciences that are female dominated. So there's this aggregation bias, and while more going to STEM, they go into STEM's degrees majored by male students, so the gender gap in STEM is increasing. So this was a very upsetting finding that my co-authors and I had. And we're trying to think, okay, the data doesn't lie, but are there any mitigating factors that could decrease or mute the effect of AI on the gender gap in STEM? And we were not sure. So initially we looked at random variables. Like what if we look at blue states versus red states? What if we look at states that have higher female representation in the state legislature? We tried different things, and it was a very robust finding. And I will show you some robustness later on. But then we came across a literature that talks about the role of having female faculty and minority as role models. There's a big literature, I mean, it's not as big, but it's an important literature that says that it helps female students when you have female professors, and it helps male students when you have, minority students when you have minority professors. And the reason for that is because female students may be better mentors to female faculty may be better mentors to female students, or maybe female students may feel more comfortable reaching out to female faculty, or maybe female students see female faculty as role models. There are many stylized facts about that. So we said, what if we were to test whether the presence of a lot of female STEM faculty affects the impact of AI on the gender gap? What if having more female faculty in STEM fields than none mitigates the negative impact of AI on the gender gap in STEM? And to do that, by the way, we don't have data on the faculty gender by institution. So what we did, we came across a database. It's called the SciSciNet. And what SciSciNet, Sci from science, what it does, it has 272 million publications. So they crawled online and gathered all the publications, and they have data on the author, affiliation, so I know the institution. They have, they call them keywords, so I can identify if a publication is in engineering or in math. And what they've done based on the author's last name, they were able to identify what they call a tribe. And based on the tribe, they use the first name with a probabilistic model to say if it's a male or a female person. So use that to link it to the faculty of every institution. And for every institution and for every major, we were able to identify the share of male and female faculty based on the publications. Okay, it's a bit technical. I will not bore you with that, but we explain that in the paper. But anyway, let me show you what happens. What you want to see here, let's stay with the first column. Again, I'm looking at the gender gap in STEM. On all degrees, the AI, a higher share of AI in online job vacancies raises the gender gap in STEM. That's a negative effect. I mean, it's positive number, but the negative effect I showed you before. However, having high AI share and a high female share of faculty teaching the STEM fields reduces the impact of AI. So you kind of want to add those two numbers. So now you have to subtract minus 6.4. And if you look across the board, consistently having a higher share of female faculty So that's a dummy. So basically, what we compare is those institutions that have a low female share teaching STEM versus high. If you have a high female share, the impact is muted. So what we find is that presence of female faculty share in STEM education reduces the negative impact AI has in expanding the gender gap in STEM. And that talks about the importance of female and minority. We don't test it here, we don't have the data, but the importance of female faculty in being role models. Now, we've done different robustness. I will skip that. So let me summarize to leave enough time for questions. The first thing we find is that AI drives up the demand for STEM education across all races. I think this is important. I mean, it's also important because when you think about AI, we think of AI as replacing the type of skills that technology would allow us to complete. And maybe we don't need to study STEM anymore because ChatGPT can do it. We still find that AI is driving more students to pursue STEM. So that's important. And across all races, that's even more important. However, we find that AI also drives up the demand for men more than women. So it drives up the gender gap in STEM and across all races. However, in institutions with higher share of female faculty, the negative impact of AI on the gender gap disappears. And that's the three findings of this study. We think our results have important implications on the future of the pay and gender gap, negative implications. And again, the reason for that is because there are all these jobs lined up with higher salaries that require STEM degree, but more and more male students than female will go and get them. So that's a negative impact. But it gives some hope on what type of optimal policies we can design to balance the opportunities for both men and women. Of course, that is to say, we only look at one channel by which women may be affected, and that's through STEM. But there are other channels by which they are affected that are not captured here. For example, you can have female gaming developers now without knowing how to code, by bringing all their innovation and creativity and their own perspectives into what a game should be, because the technical barrier, which was the coding, is not required anymore, or it's less important, right? So this is a study that's very specific. It makes a very specific contribution, but it will be part of a series of studies to give us a better sense on the future of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Alexis. This is fascinating work and also so technically detailed. I guess maybe before we go into comments, I have a few questions which are basically clarifying questions to your methodology. So I wanted to quickly close that. And one of them has to do with the timing of where you match basically a job listing, whether you match it to the same year, the degree awarded in year X with the job and at listing in the same year, or whether you're looking at lagged effects from, let's say, 4 years back. And the second question also was about whether you're looking at the degrees awarded or just enrollment in STEM degrees. And I'm suspecting that the person who asked it is maybe thinking, maybe some people enroll, but then find a great job and don't actually get a degree because of the demand. And the degree is not always needed in many AI jobs. And finally, the question that I actually wanted to ask about the timing. So your study ends in 2022, which is when we get to see ChatGPT for the first time and basically the current wave of generative AI. So what's your take? How would that change in terms of the recent progress in AI and also its availability in the public domain?
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent questions. So let me try to answer them very quickly just to give people the time to ask. I skipped the robustness, but those are, so we did lag AI by a period. Actually, we lagged it by 2 periods, by 4. It doesn't make a difference. The other thing is we excluded occupations around computer science and then we included them back. It didn't make a difference. We expanded the definition of AI skills. We built an instrument in levels, not in shares. We've done a lot of robustness checks. So we did lag because we were concerned also about, actually not concerned, we were hoping that our finding that AI, the negative finding of AI on the gender gap in STEM would go away after we lagged or we changed the parameter. No, it was very robust. Now, you ask me about 2022 and ChatGPT and the sample size. We stopped in 2021. That's when our Lightcast data ended, and that was before the launch of large language models. So in a way, that's a great thing. We have a new paper that looks at the impact on voting actually in elections in the US, and we had an election in 2024. So we look at, maybe the impact it had before LLM models was very different than after. So we studied that in that paper. When it comes to this study, I don't think we checked over, almost a decade. I don't think there is something from what I see in this paper, my other research or my other studies that tells me I shouldn't be concerned after LLM models that AI negatively affects the gender gap in STEM. I think that's there. We need to understand and try to mitigate this.
Clear. Thank you very much. So let me hand over then to Hannah for some comments about your presentation, but also I think a broader context. So of course, Hannah, you're working also on job descriptions and job ads. I know that's part of the work you have done in preparation of this flagship report of the ILO. So I wonder how you feel that might look in other countries and what observations you have on this work, how that links with your work on skills. But also, I'm very curious about your reflections beyond STEM, about this occupational segregation, how we find men and women typically in different occupations, and how that explains or is linked to this very different level of exposure, especially to those most automatable jobs. So the floor is yours, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much also from my side, Alexis, for this interesting presentation. I really enjoyed reading the paper and think that it makes an important contribution to the literature on AI and gender. I wanted to start by reflecting about how we should think more broadly about the future of work and gender inequality, and would be really interested to also hear what you think, Alexis. So how I see it, it's very unlikely that the labor market is going to become more equal for women and men in the near future. Because on the one hand, we have this trend that you've been talking about, right? So there's technological change, especially the rollout of AI, and this drives up labor demand in male-dominated occupations. We have at the same time another major future of work trend, which is population aging that now affects many regions in the world. And this is driving up labor demand for female-dominated occupations, broadly in the area of care work, broadly understood as comprising healthcare, teaching, and social work. Why should we care about this? I think you motivated it very well in your presentation. One major reason to care about this is that female-dominated occupations tend to pay less on average, meaning that occupational segregation has real economic consequences for the economic security of women and their families. And all of this seems to confirm what Francine Blau recently wrote in the ILR review, and also I think what we saw in your very first graph on the gender pay gap, that absent major social or political change, we are not going to see a closing of the gender pay gap anytime soon. And then I would like to reflect a bit about the underlying reasons for occupational segregation and the undervaluation of women's work, right? So I found particularly interesting in this regard your finding on female role models, so that having a female professor can encourage women to enter STEM education, because this speaks more broadly to the relevance of social norms in shaping occupational choices. And it reminded me of work that the sociologist Paula England has done a while back, where she's arguing that women take their mother's generation as a reference point. And in the past, the mothers were especially likely to work in clerical support type occupations. And then their daughters, on average, they might have moved up the occupational ladder, so they entered managerial or professional roles. But these were then often in areas like accounting or HR management, so areas that resembled more closely the work that their mothers had been doing. Whereas women stayed away from occupations like civil engineers or computer programmers. And maybe just as an aside, computer programming in the United States is particularly interesting because it's an occupation where we've seen initial increases in female employment, actually, but then over time, this was reversed. So the share of women in computer programming went down again, showing that progress is not always in one direction, but can also be reversed over time. Despite this clear importance of social norms, I would not only focus on this. So discrimination also plays a role. We know that there are systemic barriers to entry, especially in male-dominated technical occupations that require a lot of on-the-job training, where the share of female employment is especially low in the United States. And while it's difficult to pin down discrimination empirically, we also know from previous research that it plays a role also in occupations that require a college degree. And then as a last point, I would like to talk about something that has been very important to us at the ILO, namely the undervaluation of work typically performed by women, which is really the other side of the coin of what you've been talking about, Alexis. And in the context of our work for the forthcoming flagship report on lifelong learning, which the ILO will launch next year, we leverage, as Pavel mentioned, big vacancy data from regions so far neglected by the literature. And what we find is that workers need rounded sets of skills. What this means is that it's not enough to have technical competences and cognitive skills, but in order for workers to be successful in contemporary labor markets, ideally they combine these technical skills with socio-emotional skills. And this has an interesting gender angle because we know from previous research that women have a comparative advantage when it comes to socio-emotional skills, or if we want to state this more neutrally, at least they use socio-emotional skills more than men do. And this, thinking again of the future of work, could potentially bring good news, right? So maybe this could be something that's actually driving up female wages. What we find, however, in an upcoming ILO working paper with Ariane Hegewisch is that there are indeed positive returns to socio-emotional skills in the United States again, but these are not uniform across the labor market. And in particular, we find that these positive returns, wage returns to socio-emotional skills, are very sizable in business services, which are more gender balanced, whereas they are in fact insignificant in female-dominated care work again being the area where many women work and where socio-emotional skills are particularly relevant. And we take this as evidence of this, as one piece of evidence for this broader observation that work typically performed by women tends to be undervalued in societies and markets. And this brings me back to my initial question, Alexis, of how you feel about the future of work and gender equality more broadly.
Shall I answer, Pavel, or you wanted to say something first?
Yeah, I think I imagine you have observations and comments and also answer to Hannah's question. So maybe let's go ahead with that, but maybe on the same streak, if you could address a little bit of a technical question that is here in the forum, which is asking whether this is just an extension of the trend that has been happening since the 1990s, that basically has been systematically leaving women out of computer science jobs. So basically, that would it go, if you were to extend the trend to earlier years, would you expect to see something similar, or are you finding something new?
All right. Maybe I'll maybe talk about the last one. I don't know. I mean, we are not trying to identify, and here is the struggle I have. I mean, the person is at the university, it's their choice to go and pick engineering or computer science or math. But what we find is that women don't choose computer science, but we find that AI is driving up, let's say, more than demand for computer science. So there are many good reasons behind that, I guess. So whatever and Hannah talked about some of them, whatever the reasons were there to make it hard for women to pursue those STEM degrees, or at least the STEM within the heavy STEM, like math, engineering, computer science, because it's much easier in nursing and health studies to do STEM degrees there. The parameter is still there. Maybe what we find is that having female faculty to teach math and engineering makes it a little bit easier. Maybe it makes it easier for students to declare that major. When they see, if I'm a female student and I see I have a female professor that inspires me, I may choose to have my major. But if the only female faculty that inspire me are in history, then I become a historian. I don't know. I have two amazing colleagues. One is across from me, an economist, a young economist I hired here. I see a line of students outside her office. I have on my left a historian. She's a senior colleague. Again, a huge line of students because they feel more comfortable. They are both amazing mentors. Whatever it is, I think we find something, and that's what I said. I think our results can help guide policymaking, because Hannah also talked about there is discrimination. It's very hard to find female professors in economics. It's so hard because there are all these challenges. And now the profession is trying to take that seriously into account. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. So that's what I meant. Like, it's a small contribution to a broader picture that we need to understand. Coming back, and we look at degrees awarded, not degrees declared. I think it's better when we look at awarded degrees. Now, going back to the future of work and the gender angle, I'll try to give a 3-minute answer. I do think overall more jobs will be lost than created. We have cases where AI can replicate call centers better than people. According to estimates, 97% of the jobs in that vertical will disappear. Where are these jobs? In the Philippines. Where are these people going to work after? We don't know. But for nurses in the Philippines, there will be more and more opportunities. That's an example. So what will happen when all these skills are no longer in need? This is my view, but I see us moving to a 3 or 4 day work week. And because there isn't a lot for the humans to do, and I see governments having to offer universal basic income. And unfortunately, I see that in the economies where the government will have to play a bigger role because a lot of these tasks will disappear. For example, take South Asian economies that export services, those will disappear. Will those governments have the ability to support the people when they're left with no job? That's a major concern for me. So I see a lot of social unrest. I see a lot of hardship. Now, where do women come into that? Hannah picked on something very interesting. STEM is important, but the soft skills, the communication skills are becoming so important these days because there was this barrier. You needed to know coding. I have a friend, he's a founder of a very well-known gaming company. And I tell him, his name is Marat. I said, Marat, if I look at your developers, they're all male, but you build games for everybody. And you don't have any female to reflect their experience, their views. You are missing a lot from that. But without that technical barrier of coding, now you can invite them to the development team. You take women into a boardroom, and it even change, and there are studies, and Hannah alluded to that, and it changes the behavior of the male boardroom members. So there's more interaction, more exchange, but just by putting a female participant there. I give students assignments to do algorithmic trading models using LLM models. And it's not about how smart you are, it's how able you are to take that and communicate it to the AI agent, like you talk to a child, not with an arrogance. Once you explain it and they understand it and they can replicate it, then they can take it and run. And I find that last week actually, I had an executive training with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I had a team mainly male, but also female. The best performance was by female because of the skills. So I think there is opportunity there. And women have more creativity. They bring more to the table that were not appreciated before. They will be appreciated now even more, I think. We just need to understand what these things are, why they are important, and maybe we need to recognize that we underestimate those skills and underpay those skills.
So we have some 10 minutes left. I want to quickly pick up on your expertise of the region and the differences between different regions, because of course we have the situation you showed in your study in the US and the shares of graduates from STEM in the US context, but that differs across countries. And paradoxically, there's in the region, in many Arab states, there is a high share of female STEM graduates, but later that does not reflect in the employment in STEM-related jobs. So could you tell us quickly a little bit more about that, how that is a different context to what we've been discussing so far, let's say in the US?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. So if you think of the Gulf, I think you have more and more female students pursuing STEM degrees. I can look at my degree in economics, it's a STEM field. We have more female students. You look at countries such as Iran, you have more female students pursuing math. That has always been the case. I mean, Turkey is the same. But I think the problem here is a different one. Have we diversified the economies of the Gulf enough to create a lot of private sector jobs that these women can take outside of the government sector? If not, they end up working in the government, they go home at 2. That's a rational thing to do. And they can still have their own business on the side, right? So it's not about, we have a lot of graduates in STEM that are female, but I don't think we have diversified the economies enough to give them the opportunity. But the other part is go outside of the GCC, you have the MENA region where female labor force participation is 20%. And there are many reasons for that. And it could be that because of social norms, women are not allowed to get education, let alone STEM education. Or if they do, we don't have jobs for them. And that becomes a very big problem in the MENA region. And again, it has to do with diversification. But you go to countries like Egypt, like Jordan, very, very low female labor force participation, not just in STEM. You go to Syria, even worse. So, yes.
So education in STEM doesn't really solve the issue clearly. And with that,
but it does solve a problem, I should say, because Hannah is putting this report on skills. It's all about skills and not degrees. So if you have women, because of social norms, they cannot leave the family to go and study, or they cannot leave the family and go and work, or because they don't have access to public transportation, they cannot go to the fields and work. So they are constrained at home, they cannot provide for the family. We can offer a lot of these skills online through short courses, and these skills, so they can be learned online and they can be offered online. That changes the tables now, because we care about skills and not degrees. Maybe it will be hard to bring degrees, but we can at least start with skills.
So we have now 5 or 6 minutes left, and I wanted to close with your thoughts about policy implications. Maybe I would start actually with Hannah and have your take on it from this discussion and from your knowledge. What do you think is needed? I mean, from the discussion, do we need more incentives for women in STEM jobs, or do we need more of valuing of female-held jobs today, or both, or maybe other things? What's your take on that? And then I would ask Alexis for the same comments.
So my answer is yes and yes. We need both of these things, I would say. And the more important question is maybe how to get there, right? Because these things are so highly persistent. So when it comes to STEM, I think Alexis' finding provides reason for some hope that maybe targeted interventions when it comes to role models could play a role, even though we know that social values are so highly persistent. What I always find encouraging in this regard is the example of physicians and surgeons, because in the 1970s, that occupation was highly male-dominated. People used to believe that it's not the type of work that women should be doing or would be qualified for or interested in. And today, actually, we've achieved gender parity, at least at this broad occupational level. What we know, to bring in another dimension, what we know from work by Claudia Golden and Melanie Wasserman is that one aspect that helps women enter some occupations is less strict demands on working hours. So once those are not as rigid anymore, it can become more straightforward for women to combine work and families, and this has been driving some change. Regarding the better valuation of female-dominated care work, the hope would be that economics, the necessity drives up wages, because we are already seeing labor shortages in this area. Unfortunately, what we discussed in our forthcoming ILO working paper is that the care economy has particular features. So the work has the properties of a public good that's being provided. There are monopolistic market structures in some contexts, and also the bargaining power of the workers is often limited. And given that, unfortunately, the market alone is not going to solve the issue for us.
Great. So the same question really for you, Alexis, as the final word for policy implications. So what's your take on that? What do we take away from this session?
So I echo everything Hannah said, so I will not repeat that. Just to add on top of that, I want us to recognize that the impact is very different across societies. It will be different in the US than it will be in the Philippines, and we need to recognize that. We need more data and more studies. Data is so important, by the way. We lived through an era over the last few months where there's a war on data. But data is helping us understand the trends and how to do the right policies. So data is key. So first is realizing there's a difference across society. Second, we need to monitor if the demand for STEM will continue to grow, because the demand for all the other skills is also growing. And if we want to come up with the right policies, we need to keep track of both. And third, there is another barrier that we didn't discuss that I think will become apparent in the next coming years, which is the following. We say there's catch-22. You have recent graduates and they want to get a job. And when they apply for a job, the job says, I need a couple of years of experience. And then you say, well, if you don't give me the job, how can I get the experience that you need? Somebody has to give me a job so I can get the experiences everybody wants, the experience. This is the catch-22. What is happening now, and think about yourself or Hannah, you used to need some array to do some basic research. Now, LLM models will do that. So you don't need them anymore. So if you need an array now, the barrier, the hurdle they have to jump will be much higher. This will be the case with recent universities graduates. To get a job as a starting position with basic skills, all these are wiped out because of large language models. We see, I think it was Goldman Sachs, who's laying off a lot of people because they don't need at the basic level analysts. Law firms will not need at the basic level because we have companies that can automate the filing of patents and reduce the load by 80%. So you just need a senior lawyer to review and sign. So that hurdle that graduates need to jump to secure the first job will be much higher. So I think it's very important to understand whether it will affect male and female graduates the same way or in a differentiated way. because that can also have a very big impact depending on the direction. It will be negative impact for sure, but depending on the direction it takes for male and female, it will have a bigger impact.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this. I think the time for this interesting session is up now, but I would like to thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Hannah, for your comments and for the presentation. And I'd like to invite our audience to continue with the series. The next episode will be on the 27th of November with Piotr Lewandowski. And there we will decide how the same job might mean very different things in different countries, how tasks vary inside occupations, and how that might have an impact on exposure to AI. And exposure to AI in one country might mean something different in another country. But that's on the 27th of November. And for today, thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.